Hey there, what I have in front of me in this phone-sized box is actually not a smartphone, but a brand new mini PC from GMKtec. It is their brand new NucBox G5. Now, taking this thing out of the box, the first thing you immediately realize is just how small this thing really is. I mean, just look at it compared to its siblings, and it already looks tiny. But then you bring out other mini PCs that are actually more standard in size, and you really start to see just how tiny this thing is. And this is a full computer. If we take a look at the actual specs, this is rocking an Intel N95 processor, has 12 gigabytes of LPDDR5 RAM, that's running at 4800 megahertz, and this specific version comes with 512 gigabytes of storage. All of that crammed in this very, very tiny package. Taking a look at the actual body, it has this two-tone design that I'm personally a big fan of, and overall its compact size is able to hold enough I/O for most people, but there are some limiting factors here. If we take a look at the front, we have two USB 3.2 ports, and of course the big beautiful green power button. If we take a look at the side, we have a micro SD card slot and a Kensington lock. Realistically, you're not really going to be using this ever, but it is an option there. And of course, with the micro SD, you do have a way of expanding, and we'll talk about expansion later because this does become pretty relevant there. Now, on the back, where the more interesting stuff is at, we have the one USB 3.2 at the corner here. We do get two HDMI, one Ethernet port, and unfortunately, it is just gigabit. We of course get the audio out port, and we get a USB Type-C, but the USB Type-C is disappointingly power only. That means is that you don't get any data and you don't get any display. This seems to be more of a limitation of the platform it's on, that being of course the Alder Lake N processor series. And you might be familiar with these if you've taken a look at any of the videos that I've done on some of the other budget mini PCs out there. But chips like the N95, N100, and of course the N97 that are in here, they're all roughly the same. They're all based off of the same 4 Gracemont E-cores from Intel, and they're all roughly around the same level of performance. Major differences being that the N95 has 16 execution units on its iGPU, while the N100 and the N97 have 24. It's definitely a bump in performance, but considering that both of these are very, very low-end iGPUs, it's not going to make that drastic of a difference, and I'll talk about actual iGPU performance later. There is a key limiting factor about this platform that really ruins the performance there. But in terms of the I/O, I don't have many complaints, except for the fact that because of the layout of USB ports, it becomes kind of a problem when you set this up on your desk. Since it only has 3 USB ports that you use, and 2 of them are in the front, that means you really only have 1 in the back that is going to be usable in a way that doesn't just make your desk turn into a mess. So you're going to have to use a USB hub. Now that's fine, but of course that's added space being taken up and an added cost on the system, but it does seem pretty necessary if you want to use this in a regular desktop type of environment. Now, for what I would personally use this for, this seems perfect to just set up underneath a living room TV or a bedroom TV and avoid the whole set-top box problem of just having to use apps that have ads or that have paid subscriptions. You never know what any of these companies are going to decide to start doing, and you're kind of at their mercy when it comes to that. And if you just use one of these, you kind of avoid a lot of that. You can watch a lot of those streaming services on here. Of course, you're not going to get 4K on desktop, unfortunately. You still get 1080p. You're able to start self-hosting your own Plex server because this thing is powerful enough to do that, and we'll actually jump into the performance specifically. Now, when it comes to the chip that's in here, the N97, it does not differ that much from its siblings. They're all quad core, they're all Gracemont cores, and they're all roughly around the same TDP. And when we take a look at the Cinebench cores, the CPU really just ends up landing exactly where it's supposed to. But there's nothing surprising there. And that's specifically why this product exists in the way that it does, because Intel takes a while to replace their low-end processors most of the time. So even though we've gotten Raptor Lake and its refresh since the release of Alder Lake, there is no Raptor Lake N, there's no Raptor Lake Refresh N or anything like that. And at least going based off of what Chips and Cheese showed in a recent article, it doesn't seem like the replacement for Gracemont is going to be that big of an update. So with that being the case, then where does this land on the product stack on the market right now in terms of its performance? Well, it's competitive with everything else. One of its biggest benefits is, of course, the fact that since the N97 does have 24 execution units and it is actually able to clock higher than the N100, it should give at least better graphical performance. Now, taking a look at some of the games that I tried on there, you'll see that it's not exactly going to be that great of a performer in practically any games. It's really titles like Stardew Valley and those types of very light indie titles that are just 2D. Those will play perfectly fine. I ended up playing Balloons on here while listening to a podcast, which is something I regularly do, so it is able to do that pretty effectively. Less so when it came to 3D titles, but I think that that was going to be expected. Really, if anything, the averages were more surprising in games like Alien Isolation and BioShock Infinite, but what really lets everything down is those 1% lows, and specifically if you look at those frame time charts, it shows that there are some major problems, and I guarantee you that has to do with the fact that Intel decided in their infinite wisdom that the best course of action is to limit the Alder Lake N platform to only single channel memory, something that the previous generation Celerons did not have as a limitation. And consequently, any workloads that require a lot of memory bandwidth, specifically workloads like this where the iGPU needs to be fed, are extremely limited by this, and it really shows in those frame times, because in titles where if we had more memory bandwidth, I can almost guarantee you we'd get a pretty reasonable level of performance at the graphic settings they're set to. This just isn't able to do it. Now, you are going to be able to emulate a large assortment of different consoles, especially if you are looking to emulate some really older titles. If you want something that can emulate better than a Raspberry Pi and the vast majority of these single board computers, then this is it. But in all honesty, you don't need to spend that much more money to end up at a level where you can get Ryzen systems that have just significantly better iGPUs, and they don't even really use much more power than what this is using. What this system really strives at is the day-to-day usage that the vast majority of people are going to have on their computers, where you're just going to be doing things on a web browser, you're just going to be watching videos, you're going to be watching movies, like pretty much content consumption and web browsing is what this does really well. And thankfully, the 12 gigabytes of RAM of this system actually alleviates one of the problems that a lot of these really low budget systems end up having, which is very limited amounts of RAM. Now, to achieve its size, it did have to use LPDDR5 RAM, which means it's not upgradable. And in terms of upgradability, there is also another major flaw, and that is the fact that the kind of SSD that it has in here is the 2230 size. So think about the SSDs that go on the Steam Deck or the ROG Ally, and that means that you are limited in terms of selection, you are limited in terms of capacity, since those cap out at 2 terabytes as opposed to 4 terabytes or 8 terabytes like normal 2280 sticks. And of course, the kicker to all of that is that they're also more expensive. But all of that really only becomes a problem if this hardware right now isn't enough for what you need, and a lot of people really don't need that much storage, especially if you're trying to start off on just home labbing, you're trying out things, you're really new to it, you don't have a lot of things that you need to self-host right now, and you're just looking for something to try things out. This is pretty much it. You get x86, and with that just comes a wider array of software that you could run. And that's kind of why the size of a system like this is actually really appealing, because the kinds of people that could benefit from a system like this are the ones where they more than likely would like a system that could get out of the way as much as possible. And this really is pushing that to a whole nother level. I could pretty much see myself setting one of these up in family members' living rooms and getting them all situated with Plex, and pretty much just have them never really have to worry about having to watch ads, or in general just call you and complain about the fact that their streaming streaming box that they got at Walmart for $50 for some reason had an update that is now causing it to never turn on, and they kind of just expect you to suddenly know about how this functions. Suffice to say, switching over to something like this could save you a lot of headaches if you are the family tech person. Trust me, that is me for my family. I have found it so easy to just set people up with mini PCs like this and get them connected to my Plex server, get them signed into all of their streaming services, help them get rid of the ones that they really don't need, and pretty much from there it's just not really having to deal with much. And anytime I do need to deal with anybody, because it is just a Windows system, I am able to just remote access it. So more than likely these G5s I am going to be gifting a lot this year to different family members and friends that are stuck on still some ancient hardware, and more than likely there's going to be some great deals for this during the holiday season, so definitely keep an eye out for that if you're looking at this at that time. But as it stands right now, I really like it. There are definitely a lot of compromises that were made, but it is a surprisingly quiet and effective system that I think the vast majority of people that get their hands on it are going to be more than satisfied. But definitely check it out down below if that sounds like something that interests you. But if you want something with more power, I would definitely look into some of the higher tier units that are available on the market for not that much more money, really. Anyways, I'll catch you in the next one.